Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Literacy Development, How to Avoid COVID Slide and Digital Divide Pitfalls. I'm Heather Booth, one of the associate editors at Booklist. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. All of you in the audience are in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click the Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we'll pass along all other questions to today's panelists, either in the Q&A at the end of the session, or they can follow up with you after the webinar. Links for today's slides were sent directly to you from Zoom at the start of the webinar, but you can also download them at any time by copying the URLs on this screen into your web browser. On Monday, all attendees will receive a follow-up email containing links to today's slide presentation, a certificate of completion, and a video recording. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Melissa and Brenna. Melissa Jacobs is the Director of Library Services for the New York City Department of Education and the New York City School Library System. Brenna Shanks is a selection librarian in the King County Library System in Washington. This webinar is going to focus on how to implement a large print collection for youth as a solution to the COVID slide and the digital divide. But before we get into our conversation with Brenna and Melissa, I want to share a little bit about how we ended up here with this specific solution to these broad and difficult problems while we do a quick poll. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, the testing recorded in the nation's report card statistics, almost 2/3 of 4th and 8th grade students in our schools are reading at basic or below basic level. Last year, Project Tomorrow conducted a study of the efficacy of large print in student reading skills and mindsets and found that a majority of students in grades 3 through 12 reported improved personal self-efficacy around reading, and 1/3 of teenagers reported improved reading comprehension after reading large print formatted texts. All right, so if you want to finish up the poll here, we'll see who's collecting a large print for youth currently, and then we can see how the results turn out. And if we can move to the next slide. All right. So what exactly is it that the students are responding to? As you can see in this graphic, Thorndike's large print titles for youth share the same vibrant covers as their standard print counterparts, but are enhanced not just with a larger font, but higher contrast ink and more white space around the words and between the lines. On a personal note, I have a 7th grader who has been reading a Thorndike large print edition of Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie by Jordan Sonnenblick for her ELA class. It's assigned reading this fall. I asked her how it's going to read the large print, and she said she loves it. She said it's so much easier, I can understand it better, and it's more fun to read. All right, so if we can get to our panelists. The data findings are valuable, and you can read all about them in the support documents we link to, but today we're checking in to see how it's going in the real world. I worked with Melissa Jacobs and Brenna Shanks on a piece that was featured in the October 1st issue of Booklist titled Literacy and Longing for Equity, How Librarians Can Pave the Way for All Students, and they're here today to continue that conversation. So while they get their screens on, I can share with you, this is the issue of Booklist that it was in if you are getting the print issues, and this is the handy little insert that you can grab. You can also view all of this online. It's linked to, you can download it there. Okay, so we're going to discuss Q&A style and invite you to participate in the chat. And you can use the Q&A for questions, or you can use the chat as well, and we'll monitor that and make sure that all the questions get to the panelists. So I'm pleased to introduce 2 thought leaders in the large print for youth area, Melissa Jacobs and Brenna Shanks.
Hello. Hey, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, we're so glad you guys could join us. So we're going to start out by asking what attracted you to the large print format, specifically for youth, and are there specific things that you've seen or noticed as you've grown your large print collection?
So for me, it really was Thorndike Press bringing large print to me. And for the first time, I was like, it was my aha moment, thinking that why didn't anyone ever do this before? It just seemed like such a logical solution for so many readers. And I just had this huge light bulb go off going, we really need to figure out ways to get this into kids' hands and into schools. And so, I started to think about different programs and projects that I run and how we could provide this as an option. And I think that there's so many books that are so unapproachable for kids today that they, without large print, they're somewhat lost. And so that just the idea of the white space, the friendliness of the binding, the covers, they look like every other book. There's nothing, delineating it from other titles that are on your shelves, makes it so much more inviting for kids. And that what attracted me to that was knowing that, here's the solution for a lot of the reading struggles that our kids face.
We actually have always purchased youth large print at our library system. I've been the teen material selector there for several years. And what we used to do was just include those titles in our large print standing order, which is pretty standard for public libraries. When Thorndike started doing their Striving Reader program, I sort of took that out of the standing order queue and started doing them as I do regular selection for teen materials, as I would any alternate format like audiobooks or ebooks. So seeing that they were putting an emphasis on getting the books out, especially the really popular stuff, I just changed my method because I knew it wasn't going to be 1 or 2 books in a given quarter. It was going to be a significant number that I could get now. So it was really broadening what we had and then looking at what we were doing with what we had. And it was great to see that they were starting to not just put out a few titles here and there, but looking at sales and popularity and picking things that kids want to be reading in whatever format, but that maybe is challenging for kids in some formats and friendlier in others. So,
and for me, that seeing the popularity, the popular titles, we were running a specific program in New York City and providing collections to school libraries. And it was right at the time that I was introduced to large print for YA. And I decided to offer the collections that we had pre-selected as a large print option. And what was interesting was that, I just added that onto the grant form that we were distributing to librarians, and I would say maybe I got about, 5 to 10% of librarians that wanted this format. And then we had done a workshop where we brought in Thorndike and some other high-low publishers and introduced this as a format. And when we left that session, 100% of the individuals that were selecting that had formerly selected regular print asked to change their order. And so that was that beginning stage of like, oh, I never really thought of this as a format for my students. I got paperback, I got hardcover, that's that. And this provided another opportunity and medium to curate.
So as you started adding large print, just it wasn't a decision to start adding them for students who were below reading level. It was just across the board. Yes.
And I think that for me, I look at it as just having it as a part of the collection. I've stated this when it comes to LGBT titles and other parts of collections that have been pulled out and said, okay, this part of the collection is special and we're going to highlight it. I don't think that you should out a book for LGBT, and I don't think that you should out a reader that needs large print. You know, this should be a part of the collection and interfiled and just available. And so as a reader, I can select the format that's best for me.
We're still working on interfiling. Traditionally, we have put youth large print with adult large print. So now we're slowly transitioning. We've got about 50 libraries, so it takes some time to get that done. But generally speaking, we've always felt like we don't ask patrons why they want a specific format, whether it's because they're striving readers, or because they have vision impairment, or because they just like the bigger text, or because they really want to read that book and that's the copy on the shelf. You know, we don't care why they grab it, just that they do. But the more formats we can offer, the more people we can reach. So there's no disadvantage to offering. In fact, there's only advantage, because you're only extending your reach.
Agree completely.
So talking about the advantages of large print and adding that as another format, we discussed why large print is particularly relevant right now in the moment that we're in, with kids struggling, having lost contact time with teachers and trying to learn remotely. And also, you know, just struggling with, you know, the digital divide issues that we have right now relating to COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about how it seems like tech is the answer so often in a situation like this, where we're all kind of like, you know, back in our own homes and remote? Can you talk a little bit about why a large print in print is a workable solution for you?
So we're actually our libraries are doing curbside. So we are getting physical materials out to the patrons, and realized very quickly that they are still eager for those physical materials. The digital divide is real. There are a lot of people who just do not have consistent access, or if they do, they have to use it for specific purposes. You know, they may only have so much data, or even if they have the data, you know, they have to share a device in a household. There's all sorts of reasons why screen time might be limited, and maybe why screen time should be limited, just in terms of attention span and capacity. I think we all know what it's like right now to feel Zoom fatigue and to want to take a break from the screen. And so if you actually have the print book, you can take your assignment and go be separate and read and get through it. And we don't, I mean, this is sort of incidental that I just thought of recently, but with large print, we're also getting a lot of eye fatigue from all of this screen time. And with large print, you know, you're giving your eyes a break. You're giving yourself that sort of change in venue. So not only is it important for the digital divide, but just in terms of ergonomics, it's another tool in the kit, which kids need too.
I agree with that. And I'm looking at sustainability, and I definitely think our reading habits have changed during COVID. We are building up more and more ebook collections, and the connection between ebooks and large print is that in an ebook format, you're able to enlarge the text size without even thinking about it. And I think that more and more students are getting comfortable with that larger text size. And so to make the transition from that back to print, I feel, you know, that our students are going to gravitate to a large print book more likely when we go back in person full time and there is some semblance of normalcy. So although there may be less of a trend right now, I think long term, in one of the benefits that, or I hate the word benefits during COVID, but one of the lasting results is that our students' reading habits are going to definitely change. And I see that there is going to be a switch or a gravitation to large print because of COVID and because of the number of ebooks and reading habits that we've developed during this time. I
You
think
got your mute on.
Sorry, got it. A question came in the chat that I think is really good as we think about the reading habits and the preferences of students who might be striving or struggling a little bit to keep up with their peers. Do you see the format, just the physical size of the book, ever to be intimidating to the young readers that you're working with? In terms of like, maybe there's a slightly longer page count or something like that.
I mean, do you want to take that one? Or
I think that can really vary. I think a lot of books right now are long anyway. I mean, a lot of the teen books, especially the fantasies, are doorstop books. So if I don't feel like that necessarily is going to intimidate. And I actually think the white space takes away that intimidation, because when you open up a doorstop book in regular text and it's just this meaty thing that you have to slog through, I think it is daunting. But when you open up one of the large print and there is the white space and there is the sense that, okay, I can pace myself through this, I think it's a little less intimidating. So I'm not sure it's definitive to me that it would go one way or the other.
I think, I've given my daughters large print books and they never looked at it like, oh, this is different and special. They've just, looked at it as, this is interesting and I want to read it. So I will say, back when I was an elementary school librarian, the Harry Potter syndrome was the second grader coming into the libraries, taking the largest book that they could find and grabbing that large copy of Harry Potter and saying, well, I'm going to read this. And, walked around with it very proudly. And whether they read it with their sibling or parent or guardian, I think that some may be really proud of it. Some may want to hide their reading habits. Some, I think it really depends on the individual reader.
Well, and I do think that what you mentioned earlier, it is a variable text world right now, and people are so used to changing the font on their computers and their readers. And I think that it's not as, I think it's just like a lot of us are getting used to turning captions on movies too, like I think a lot of us are using the tools that are available, whether we have a physical need for it or not, just for ease of use. And I think teens especially, I think youth especially is adaptable to that. So less and less of an issue in terms of a stigma around a format.
And if you look at the accessibility of websites, I mean, we're doing a big, huge push to every website has to be accessible to all. So I look at, it's the same thing, that there is reading materials for all in every format. And it's less of an accessibility when you have so many options available to you. It's less of an issue.
Well, and we found that when we fix things on our website for ADA reasons, it's a benefit to everybody else too. Right. It's not like only the people who are in need of those ADA regulations benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know large print has been talked about, and some of the Project Tomorrow study too, I think did touch on using large print as an option for students who are English language learners. Have either of you experienced that as a solution or an aid for students who are acquiring English skills?
Melissa, you might have a better start on that.
Shared the format with ELL and MLL directors. And I've also, it has been discussed amongst librarians, especially when we've done professional development workshops around using this as a format specifically for English language learners. So although I don't have personal experience with that, I definitely think that it can be a format that they would appreciate and benefit from.
And I would assume the same. I'm just sort of starting to get all of our teen librarians on board with how to use and promote large print for youth. And I know that our children's selectors probably doing the same with the children's librarians. So it'll take some time before we start to see how they're using it in conjunction with school libraries and what their school librarians are finding and using. We also have things like teen talk time and things where we work with ESL students And I don't know if that will be an opportunity for them to promote some of those materials, but it could be, and we'll see how it goes. Traditionally, we know any language learners may turn to large print in general as a tool. So we have seen that.
Great. All right, I think we're going to go back to the slides for a bit, and we're going to do another quick poll. And we're going to talk about the specifics of how you brought large print into your libraries. So if we can get to slide 8. There we go. So Brenna, when we spoke about the article back this summer, you were still in the process of just opening your library back up to patrons. And I'm curious what service looks like at your library now and how you're engaging with your community. And of course, then how large print fits in.
Right. So we are still closed as buildings, and what we're doing is curbside. So we're circulating to patrons via curbside. And that means that what's getting sent out is really up to the librarians handling. It's either holds or it's librarians putting together what we're calling surprise bags, which the patron asks for what they want in it. But when we talked this summer, the goal was that right before we closed was when I had begun talking with the librarians about interfiling their collections and ways that they might be using large print. And so you can see from the pictures there, those are from one of our collections where large print was interfiled with regular YA. But these were some of the ideas that that came up sort of in our discussion, which is, the first thing to do is look at large print as a format and purchase it as a format and intentionally. So just like you would e-audio or audiobooks or ebooks or regular print, and to make sure that you're selecting the titles and not just sort of letting it go on auto select. The other thing is to make sure staff and patrons are aware of large print options. I think a lot of our staff and patrons don't think about large print for youth because it hasn't traditionally been widely available. So, getting the staff on board is the first part, and then they can get the patrons on board. And then encourage interfiling. That's key, as Melissa mentioned, to make sure that it's just another book on the shelf. And then I've also thought, and we haven't tested this out yet because we don't have public in the buildings yet, but putting large print displays out or a large print copy out in a display the same way you would any copy. And then also online, we have new reads list that we put out, and I mean to start including some large print editions there without necessarily calling them out as such, but just as available copies. And then the last thing is encouraging staff when they're at the shelf to make sure that they don't skip over, like if that's the book they want to recommend and it's the large print copy, recommend that book, or if they think they have a reader who might benefit from a large print edition, to go ahead and pull one of those because they know their patrons and who might benefit. So those were some of the things that I thought of as starting points that we're working on. Once we're open for browsing again and for actual people in the buildings, I'm hoping I can get more and more interfiled. And like I said, incorporate things like displays.
So in the chat, we had a few questions specific to how you shelve your content. And so you're an advocate for interfiling. If we can skip to the next slide, you can see a little bit closer illustration of how that works. But have you found that you're running into shelf space concerns, adding this format into the collection that you already have?
In some of our smaller branches, yes, which is why interfiling is an option at the moment and not mandatory. So it takes time. As I said, we have like 50 libraries, varying sizes. So it takes time for us to change a shelf location universally. And sometimes we allow for people to change that if their space is really at a premium. So this library, which is one of our mid-sized libraries, did have room and started interfiling right away. And even my smallest libraries were willing to try it, knowing that they'd get a smaller percentage of what I buy anyway. So knowing that it's probably not going to be, they're not going to be overwhelmed by too many books. So generally speaking, we try to interfile most formats into the teen area. But there are occasionally libraries where there's no room. And so we say, well, if you need to put the audiobooks in with the adult audiobooks, you can. But they have, they have to make room for graphic novels, and they have to make room for classics, and they have to make room for, so making room for large print is actually relatively easier because you're interfiling it with the regular fiction, which you have to weed and maintain regularly anyway. So space is an issue. We try to handle it without being too draconian on them. But generally speaking, most of us at libraries are used to managing space issues, and given enough time and enough room, we can figure it out. And I think the benefit outweighs the work in this particular case. I think you're just not going to get as much circulation if they're over with the adult large print. Ultimately, you'll still get some, because people will want that book, or because somebody does have a vision impairment, or because an adult checks it out. But you're going to get better probably by interfiling.
I appreciated when you sent these pictures, how when you look at the shelf, I had to look closely to make sure that this was a large print photo.
Right.
And it's just a small indication. And on the previous slide, I think you had 2 copies of Between Shades of Gray right next to each other, one regular print and one large print. And so that's, I think, a nice illustration too of how they just kind of fit next to each other nicely on the shelf.
And actually her last book, Fountains of Silence, when I ordered it, I accidentally ordered the large print instead of the regular. And I think it took weeks before anybody noticed. So
so do you have a separate budget line specifically for large print?
I do not. It comes out of the regular fiction budget. So it's just integrated with my regular teen budget. I don't think I would change that, honestly. It is just another fiction edition, or nonfiction. I do break out formats. Well, everybody's budgeting process is different. Ours is fairly flexible. So, but other people have to line item every format. We actually have to line item leased versus purchased ebooks differently. So the auditor wants us to. So, everybody does it a little differently, but if you wanted to track, you'd want to separate it. But generally, I just include it with my fiction. Right. And I usually handle the lists in the same time frame as my fiction lists. Okay,
that makes sense. Yeah. All right, so Melissa has some tips too, if we can get to slide 9. So here we see some tips for positioning and advocating for a youth large print collection. Melissa, can you share a little bit more about that process, what that process was like for you, and your work in advising other librarians in incorporating large print?
So I really encourage librarians to interfile, and I'm a strong believer of not labeling, because I want it to be just a part of the collection. And so if you take the book off the shelf, you'll see that it is a large print book once you open it, but I don't believe in even putting a label on it to say that it's large print. So with that, making students comfortable finding it, looking in a record to see if that book is available in large print, if they were searching for it, and making sure your MARC records were current enough to have that as an indication, so that when the user did do a search, that they were able to locate it if they were specifically looking for that type of format. And I think that goes into erasing the stigma that it's, you don't need to, it's not special if you have to read this format. It's just another format, and it makes it much more accessible to a lot of readers that have issues. But it also just makes it, it's the book, it's the content, it is what the author intended it to be, which was, just a book to engage you as a reader. I think there's an opportunity in schools to collaborate with reading coaches and special ed teachers and occupational therapists and other classroom content teachers, and letting them know about the different formats. Because as librarians, you know, we often look for those opportunities and those entry points into conversations with specialty teachers and content area teachers and therapists. And this definitely provides that connection to these different positions in the building, so in a school building. So I would use it as an opportunity to engage our other colleagues in those conversations, because I highly doubt that other educators are aware of this, because it is you know, a fairly new concept. And I think Thorndike is really building up the breadth of their collection, but I don't think it's a well-known accepted format across the board yet. So it does take that you know, opportunities like this webinar and other moments that you can leverage it with your teachers. And you know, although there is not a specific budget line for large print in school libraries, and we're using the traditional funds that we acquire any part of our collection. Once you have these conversations with, you know, your therapist, with your administration, with your other content area teachers, you know, use it as an opportunity to advocate for additional funds that we can, you know, if we had 2 times, 3 times, 4 times the budget, we can easily build a collection and make it much more widely available. You know, we could build up book club sets that are in large print. We've integrated this into our program. We have a program in New York City with the Tri-Library system with NYPL, BPL, and Queens that we collaborate with them with My Library NYC, where we do interlibrary loan. And we have over 10,000 text sets that we lend out to schools, and we've built large print sets so that they become more and more familiar with the collections and the medium. And so I you know, I was like, this is an opportunity to really expose everybody to this format.
Lost my unmute button there for a second. Sorry about that. Yeah, all of this I think is fantastic. And I think it really speaks to how the library can be a leadership piece in the school, or, you know, in the teen or youth section can be a leader in the library as a whole, in the public library. A couple more questions have come in. For those readers who are specifically looking for large print on the shelves, if your items are interfiled, how are you helping those readers find the large print? And that could be either Melissa or Brenna.
That is,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, for I think I mentioned it before, like making sure that your MARC records are up to date and current, and having an indicator on the record if they're doing searching, if they're searching your online catalog. And I think just, you know, I think interfiling is, you know, when you're browsing the shelves, becoming familiar with the different types of formats that you can take paperback. You have mass market paperback, you have, you know, hardcover. There was also a conversation, you know, that I've had, that teens like to have paperbacks because they could shove them in their pocket, or they don't have, you know, other kids get to see them reading, but at the same time, you know, they're not durable for long-term use. So, you know, it's balancing all these things and just making them widely accessible.
And we do put that small little LP in the call number, which is similar to how we designate our genres. We put a little S for science fiction and a little R for romance. And so, you know, I think you can put a designator in if you need to, or if you feel like it's valuable. But I think there's also, like you said, benefit to not labeling the book. So that's sort of just up to individual systems and how they track things. I will say that just recently, looking at through the large print titles in our catalog, I was pleased to see how many were out circulating right now, which means they're circulating on holds, because that's pretty much the way that things are going out for us right now. But some of the more popular titles, I didn't have any on the shelf. They were all out. So, I think that the people who want them and need them will find them because you have it in the MARC records, because they know where to look on the shelf. And I think, what's often going to happen anyway, because it's not, not everything gets a large print edition. At some point that patron will probably go and look in the catalog, because they'll be like, well, does this even exist? In which case they're your MARC records. We'll catch it for them. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, that leads nicely to our next slide, which is the fun stuff, title selection. So we know large type from Thorndike is, we know Thorndike offers over 500 middle grade and YA titles in this large print format. So how do you pick? And we had one of the questions come up in the chat in terms of, is this a format that you could suggest to a reluctant reader or someone who prefers graphic novels? So how are you selecting your titles from this list of over 500 and growing?
So I think, years past when we were working with building collections for a school, it's just a matter of making it available. And so if you would buy multiple copies of a title, instead of buying all three in hardcover, making one available in large print and just integrating that into it. And so the fact that they have, when you asked us for selections of our favorite titles in large print, that these are popular, well-reviewed titles that kids are reading and want to read and are on the top of everybody's lists. And so, if you're buying multiple copies, make sure a large print is a part of that selection of copies. I also think that, you if you have an opportunity, to just try it, that you take that opportunity and just don't look at it as something, out of the ordinary. And you have, if I buy, I can't do this because I don't have the money to buy an entire collection of large print, I think that you can slowly start building up that collection.
And I definitely start with the bestsellers and the award winners. That's the easiest place to start. Those books are going to go out anyway. People want them. And some of them have quite a bit of longevity. Part of the reason I put Hoot up there was because I was looking and I was like, oh, I actually need to replace the large print editions of his books because they're circulating to the point where I only have a few left in some cases. And they had some of the highest turnover on my report. So I think that if you start, if you can only do a little bit, start with a few bestsellers and some award winners. Start with some things that are read widely by your population and frequently, that come up again and again, and then venture into lesser known or mid list as needed. And you might get requests for specific things too. I have gotten large print youth requests. So when people want something that you didn't get, they can ask.
And I think also for school librarians to talk to their public librarians, for public librarians to reach out to their school librarians, because there are titles that, do come up again and again that are a part of the curriculum. Like Hoot is one of those books that is frequently read in a class. So if you're speaking as a school librarian and you don't have the funding, reach out to the public library to see if they can acquire that title and if they can acquire that title in large print.
Right.
And the same goes for public librarians to reach out to school librarians and ask about what books are, curriculum focused, what books they know that students are going to come in and need and want, and look at that to build up your collection in that manner.
And also, it is a chance to think about diversity issues, to think about the digital divide, to think what books might be best to promote in certain communities where large print would be a benefit. So, something like The Hate U Give, that is a big and somewhat intimidating book. And so, offering a large print version gives it that wider readership that we were talking about. So you can address some things that way. Children of Blood and Bone, for that matter, is a doorstop of a book, but all things that were super popular and super current event related that people wanted to be, kids wanted to be reading. So giving them that extra version can bridge some gaps that maybe we couldn't otherwise bridge. And when it comes to working with the schools, I know our system struggles with, we can't really do like classroom sets for schools because we don't have the money either with as many school districts as we serve. But we can make sure we have some copies that are available so that the students who want that large print can put their hold on it and get it, and so it's really about just bridging the gaps where you can find them. We know there are so many, both with diversity and with digital divide, there are so many places where, where we fail. Not we have the best of intentions, but we just can't reach some kids, and any extra tool is a good thing. So, and I think that's also one of the benefits that we're seeing things like Brown Girl Dreaming and Stamped in a large print edition as well.
Yeah, and in the print piece that we did in the October 1st issue, we talk a little bit more about that, how to reach out into different parts of your community, and how large print can really help to lift those students that are struggling. And sometimes, we do see a lot of connection between economic disadvantage and reading disadvantage and things like that. So that's another place to look for that. And then I had another thought, which is now totally escaped my brain, so I'll just let you continue on. Did we have any other comments on the title selection?
Just I've been excited to see so many of the, I know things like, Rick Riordan circulates like mad in our system, and the large print as well. I was just looking at that and I need to replace it. So being able to get the bestsellers, being able to get the award winners and sort of the current topical things like The Hate U Give or A Long Way Down or Stamped, the things that people are buzzing about in a timely way, not 2 or 3 years later, to get them out into the hands of people is, just hugely important in general.
Are there situations where you'll choose to purchase, if you have limited funds, you'll choose to purchase the large print over a traditional print?
That hasn't come up in our context. It's always been, I sort of just scale it. I'll get, a certain number of regular and then a certain number of large print, and then I often let holds, if holds are going to push it. Like I think my starter set of The Hate U Give, I added to like twice because holds kept pushing it up. But if I was in a situation where I had to choose, I couldn't do like a 1-for-1, which would be ideal. If I was in a smaller library, it'd be nice to say, well, I can get 1 copy of the regular and 1 copy of the large print. But if I had to choose between, there's really no downside to choosing the large print version. It's the same content. If somebody asked, you'd have to say, well, we're just trying to make it more accessible for everybody. But I don't think you'd probably get any pushback. So
I would go for large print. And I also specifically, Thorndike has a really good binding also that I think is very durable. And I don't think that I think it's worth every penny.
Well, and the cost, that has been an issue in the past, was that large print cost more, but that's less and less true. They're sort of comparable, especially if you're dealing with vendors and have discounts. A lot of people deal directly with Thorndike. They have discounts depending on your situation and account. So, I think that, in terms of cost effectiveness, it's probably going to equal out to a certain degree, and certainly maybe more than a paperback that circulates and falls apart more quickly. So, I don't think that the cost benefit issue is a factor anymore, at least not as much as it may have been at one point.
All right. We have one more poll that we're going to pop up on the screen for participants. And while you're answering the poll, I'll give Melissa and Brenna an opportunity to share any other thoughts they have on large print as a format for youth, any maybe favorite titles that you've come across in the catalog that you were excited to share, success stories, anything like that.
I think, having the opportunity to introduce it to as many people as possible, and for me, I work and oversee so many schools and so many libraries in the city that I introduce it when I have that opportunity. And once librarians realize that it is a really engaging format that does not take away from the experience for the reader, and that it actually has benefits that are add-ons, I think that they're sold on it. And so if you do work with other libraries and other librarians and other teachers and even students, just keep introducing it and getting your, introducing it and giving it to your kids and spreading the word that it is a viable, engaging format for everybody.
I think that most of the librarians I work with are all about removing barriers, and this is another way to do that. So most of them are an easy sell on a new format that may, or an old format reintroduced, that may give them another way to break down a barrier. And I think one of the more interesting things working on this with you guys, I've been sort of talking with some peer institutions, finding out how they're handling their youth large print, and finding out which ones are still getting the standing order and which ones are selecting them directly like I do, and sort of seeing where we're all at the moment with this, and how much more they're sort of that we need to do things like this to get this into people's consciousness. I think that's been interesting to see, because sometimes I go about doing my selection assuming everybody's doing something somewhat similar to what I'm doing, and then talking to people and realizing no, maybe they're not. So I think that's something. And then also I am eager to see how our teen librarians use these as I increase purchasing, because we have a really wide variety of communities, from rural to urban, from rich to poor, and so it'll be interesting to see where this makes an impact, and who can utilize it best. Should be good to see in the coming years. So
I'm excited to see the when we go back to normal, back to the future. Like I'm really looking forward to building a physical collection again and being in a library, and I think that it will be very interesting to see the changing reading habits. And I do predict that this will become a regular part of your collection development as far as a format.
Yeah, and going back to the research through Project Tomorrow that Thorndike was involved with, it's what struck me as remarkable is how uniformly across the board large print can improve the reading experience for all kinds of students, no matter where they are with reading skills. And so I think that using this moment that we have now with things at a different pace and people using the libraries in different ways, we have an opportunity to reach people in a different way. So we've got some poll results up here.
It's so interesting. Passive promotion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. So I think that kind of harkens back to something, Melissa, that you were saying early on about how you don't it's your choice not to out a book, and that just passively making these things available is a good option. I know with my daughter, who is she loves to read, but she's a slow reader. the times that she's picked up a book and opened it up and seen the white space and seen the larger print, you can like, there's a visible relief on her face. And so, yeah, just having them available. So when she picks up the cover that's appealing to her, being able to see that she feels like she has more opportunity for success in that setting.
I'm a big believer of sneaking the vegetables into food and, you know, sneaking the reading materials into places all over the house. When my kids were really young, I had, you know, subscribed to every kid magazine that I possibly could get my hands on and just left them strategically around the house in addition to books and other things. And, you know, I think that this is the same way. You just have to strategically place it and that kids will read it. And I think adults will read it as well. You know, it's just, don't be scared. Don't be intimidated. Don't be, you know, just reopen the book and read it and enjoy it. And, you know, break down the barriers that that some kids might have, because that, you know, for them to be excited about the content rather than anxious about the format, I think is something that is a win for teachers and librarians.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now that the art is identical and really, I mean, looking at those books on the shelf, you don't, like you said, with the two next to each other that were the same title, you don't really track which one's the large print. You just pick one of them. And I think right now what's interesting with COVID is as much as people are trying to entertain themselves, I feel like we're seeing even more people reading. You know, we've seen increased digital circulation. And like I said, our holds are still going out. And I think a lot of people are reaching for their comfort reads too. You know, they're reaching for the things that they love and want to revisit, whether it's Harry Potter or, you know, or any other big franchise title or the more independent ones. And so, you know, I think that what will be interesting too coming out of this is to see, like, do we have some new readers who maybe didn't do a lot of reading before because they were super busy, but now they haven't got the sports to do or the, you know, the extracurriculars, and so are they taking a little bit more time to read?
Great time to do book and movie tie-ins.
Yeah, for sure. We have somebody in the chat who mentions pairing the books with audio too. So if you have the large print, you have the audio. As the audio editor at Booklist, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, that's a win-win. And that, you know, if you have the opportunity also, because we're not just acquiring ebooks, but we're also acquiring digital audiobooks. And so that may be a way to, you know, bring kids, you know, out of this just electronic format and kind of get them moving towards print again.
Right. Well, and it's so easy to listen on devices now. You know, you don't have to have a dedicated machine. You know, it can be your phone. It's so easy to listen to audiobooks, and I think that a lot of kids have gotten used to being able to access those easily. So being able to transition, you know, sometimes I know that when I'm listening to an audiobook, I think it's not going fast enough. I need to find out what happens next. And so then I want the book. And so, you know, that may be true for kids too, you know, where it's like the reader's not going fast enough and then they'll switch over. So yeah, I mean, like I said, every format is a tool for us and a way to break down a barrier. So, and when you compare them, that's even better.
Mm-hmm. Another question in the chat, this is probably more for Brenna in a public library setting, but do you interfile your large print in the adult fiction and nonfiction section? And how do you handle a large print nonfiction in the youth section?
Right, so we haven't interfiled that as yet. The idea of interfiling large print is relatively recent for us. Like I said, we were just starting to work on it for teen when we closed. I don't know how we would approach that. There's a lot of clunky shelving things with the adult collection that I want to do first, including separating out graphic novels, which right now are interfiled in 741. So like most of our interfiling projects, I have to give myself a year and be like, okay, this is the year of X, fixing this one. So fixing or deciding to interfile large print for adult would have to be a whole nother chain of decisions and decision makers and executors. But for youth nonfiction, I'll have to look at where we put, I mean, I think we might interfile large print nonfiction anyway with adult. So I'd have to look, like that may more naturally interfile. We may not pull those out. I certainly would be more of an advocate for interfiling those for youth. Just because I think that's, nobody's going to go looking for that youth nonfiction title in adult large print. You know, they're going to think that's adult fiction. So I haven't dealt with that yet, but and adult might be a scope beyond me. But I am trying to convince the children's librarian to join in and do what I'm doing with teen. So one step at a time, one hill at a time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'll share one final comment from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the closing comments. Hampton Library says, large print is now the new norm with people of all ages. So we can all cheer for that, right? Thank you both so much for your time, for sharing your expertise and your enthusiasm about this format. I'm going to encourage all of our audience to check out the paper that's available at the link that you see on your screen here, or in print attached to the October 1st issue of Booklist. If you'd like to learn more about the why and how of large print collections, be sure to check out that link. Huge thank you to our wonderful panelists. Oh, I also want to mention that you can, through those links that we've shared, see what Thorndike's new catalog has to offer in terms of new and exciting titles that are available in large print. All right, thank you to our wonderful panelists, Brenna and Melissa. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. If anybody has questions specifically for them, you can enter them in the chat, and we will get them along to our panelists as well to answer in the coming days. On Monday, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, a certificate of completion, and a video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones. If you haven't already, be sure to check out our Booklist Reader, where Booklist contributors post daily about all things books and library land. Booklist's digital edition is a format that pairs the print page-by-page reading experience of print with the convenience of online access at booklistonline.com. Interested in subscribing? Take advantage of this special webinar offer to get print, online, digital, and archive access to Booklist for only $99. Great value. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar. One more thank you to our sponsor, Thorndike Press from Gale, a Cengage company. This concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.